Good evening to everybody, and a very warm welcome to this third session of our 4 webinar series on customs litigation and mitigation strategies. To allow everybody to join and settle in, we'll take a couple of minutes. We'll be starting at 4:02. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this third session of our customs webinar series focused on customs litigation and mitigation strategies. As we have already covered the first 2 sessions, where in part 1 we covered the emerging controversies in customs litigation space, specifically in the area of classification, valuation, and export incentives. In session 2, we've discussed in detail the customs or a post-clearance audit concept and the various types of customs audits and what kind of preparation and preparedness that can be followed to address the audits if initiated for importers and exporters. Today, we are going to talk about the customs investigation procedures. And for that, we have, again, our esteemed guests and past partners from Taxcraft Advisors here, Rajat Chabra and Ketan Tadsare. Rajat is an ex-BMR and ex-EMP advisor who has been advising extensively on customs and FTB matters to clients. He's over 15 years of experience, Rajat? Yeah, and we have Ketan again with extensive experience on customs matters and FTB matters, having over 12 years of experience in indirect taxation and customs. And he happens to have worked with ELP before and Lakshmi Kumaran. So welcome both Rajat and Ketan once again, and thank you for continuing to be with us in this fairly extensive coverage on customs litigation and mitigation strategies. So like I said, today we are going to talk in detail about customs investigation procedures. And if you notice, we've talked about 2 different aspects. In session 2, we delved into customs audits, and today we are talking about customs investigations. So one of the, I have a very, very basic question for our audience here, just to get a sense of, how familiarized our audience is with respect to these 2 spaces. So is it fair for us to talk about audit and investigations vis-a-vis customs as interchangeable processes? I'm repeating my question, and I would request our support here, Anshika, if you can bring on the poll question here. We would want to our participants to give their response to our question. Can audit and investigation be referred interchangeably with respect to customs matters? Please go ahead and start polling. All right, so I think Anshika, is our time up for the poll? Okay, great, awesome. So interesting. We see it's a 50-50 almost. If we club the yes and sometimes answer to no, the response from our audience is actually evenly divided. That's really interesting, and that's precisely the reason why it becomes very important for us to talk about what we are going to talk today. And just to clarify, between the respondents who said yes or sometimes, the answer is no. Customs, audits, and investigations are two entirely different spaces. And it's precisely for this reason that we had two different sessions covering these two spaces. Today, our focus is on customs investigations. To take you through today's agenda and displaying today's content slide, since it's already clear and we've demonstrated that there is a lot of confusion about what is audit and what is investigation, we are going to first address and break this myth that audit and investigations are actually somewhere overlapping or same kind of processes. So we'll talk about how an audit actually in form of process, the methodology, the framework, the enforcement agencies are actually distinct from investigations. And since today's topic is investigations under customs, we are going to talk about various investigation agencies. Our participants here may have already been interfaced with some of these agencies, but I can promise that you would find some new names in today's session. So there's a lot today to unfold. Stay tuned with us to see which all agencies can actually come and knock your doors, or who all are actually impacting at the back end when you are engaged in import-export processes. We will be talking about the investigations in terms of the process and the methodology and how things work on ground at three different levels: the method of investigations, the power of investigation agencies, and the framework around investigations. A very important aspect of investigations is actually the inquiry that happens on the people who front-end the investigation process. And then with that being in our mind, we are going to talk in detail about the customs summons and statement process. And again, I can promise there are some interesting details coming on in your way today, which you may or may not be privy to before this session today. We'll be talking about search and seizure as process in detail. and to leave our audience with some key pointers in terms of what all our audience need to be mindful of whenever there is an investigation being underway. We'll cover that through a detailed checklist towards the later part of today's session, and we'll be summing up the session with the key takeaways. So, like I said, audit and investigations are actually two different processes. So let's look at what is actually the difference. Audit is a routine check exercise that is conducted by the authorities. On the other hand, investigation is an off-routine by exception, where there is a higher risk identified by the authorities. It's an exception-based exercise undertaken by the authorities. Every single importer exporter at some point in time in their life actually expect themselves to be audited. However, that may not be true for investigation processes. Some of you may not have so far been investigated ever, and may never ever be investigated, and we hope so. Every audit actually proceeds with an advance notice where what kind of information is required from the auditee is intimated. On the other hand, investigation usually comes with an element of surprise. Since audit is a routine checking exercise, the whole premise on which the audit is based is a very neutral stance from the auditing authorities, having a blank slate just to understand the facts and seeing if there are any aberrations, any defaults. But the mindset has to be neutral, and is more a fact-finding kind of an approach. On the other hand, investigation is a process that is actually with a stance of already some kind of a suspicion that, like I highlighted earlier, and maybe focused to tap certain categories of importers, certain categories of transactions, certain premises. In audit, it's a business-friendly approach that the authorities generally have, or we could expect to have, but you could expect an aggressive investigating approach during an investigation process. It's pretty obvious that usually it's a cooperative exercise when it comes to an audit, while you are actually under an interrogation or some kind of a rigorous inquiry when you are being investigated. Now, it's just to sum it all up, audit is a routine checkup, but investigation is something that if there is a problem being sensed by the investigation authorities, that's when the investigation authorities come into the picture. Now, having laid down enough emphasis on, and probably to some extent scandalized our audience, now I invite Ketan to take the session over from here and take us through the details this point forward. Welcome, Ketan.
Thank you. Thank you, Poonam. In fact, thank you so much for not just handing it over, but very clearly, setting out the difference between what audit and investigation is indeed, and the fact that audit and investigation on an inherent level have a different approach from the authorities, and which also then makes sense that as an assessee, as a taxpayer, we also need to bear a different approach to face these. So yes, it's very important, in fact prime importance, so to say, to understand this differentiation. And then when it comes to investigation, we will of course see how it goes about, which ones are the agencies that could do it, and then how we could tackle these around. So to start with, we would understand which possible investigating agencies have the powers to investigate your transactions. The first and foremost name is Directorate of Revenue Intelligence. I'm sure that most of us at one or the other point in time have heard this name or this nomenclature. It is also because this is the apex investigating agency working under the aegis of CBIC for implementation of Customs Act or to investigate transactions that come under the purview of Customs Act. This was established in 1957, so it has a very long-standing legacy. And of course, it means it also has a very huge experience to its kitty, which with which it can navigate through complex of the transactions with pretty much ease and a different perspective around it. So, with after DRI, the most prominent name that could come to our name is SIIB, which is Special Investigation and Intelligence Branch. As the name itself suggests, it's an investigation and intelligence branch of the CBIC. Again, it is meant to prevent fraudulent transactions on the export side. The difference between DRI and SIIB is, of course, is very again important to understand, and we have dedicated a information slide for that as well, and we will take a look at it at a relevant time. Then there is another agency, DGGI, Directorate General of GST Intelligence. Now, this was again the forum established in 1979 as DGCEI, which is Directorate General of Central Excise Investigation. And with the obvious change of the law in 2017, this was renamed as DGGI. Now, why a GST investigation agency is relevant for customs law is also an important aspect. And again, we will take a look at that piece as well. Then comes CEIB, which is Central Economic Intelligence Bureau. It's an agency that many of us may not have heard of. And it's okay because it's an agency that may not have a direct interface with the taxpayers. It's an agency that usually works at the back end, like Poonam had very categorically explained in her introduction. Then comes ED, Enforcement Directorate. I'm sure this is buzz of the town so far as the whole country right now is concerned, and many of us have heard this name not just in tax space but into the mainstream media as well. This is an umbrella agency, and it investigates economic crimes, and this also has its Act. Of course, there is a catena of investigating agencies that always investigate one or the other aspect of a transaction that could be covered as a could be relevant for an import or an export or any other activity that's covered under Customs Act. But having said that, these five hold the prime importance for the purpose of today's discussion. All right. So with this, we move on to start speaking about each agency individually. Like we said, DRI is the most important agency also for the fact that it investigates all the import transactions. Now, under the Customs Act, as we know that import and export, both these transactions are covered under the customs law. But given the kind of cross-border transactions India has engaged into, we have a lot more import than export. That means there is a much bigger scope on DRI's plate to address, and that is why DRI is more active as an investigating agency. Now, it was incorporated in 1957, like we said, and is a premier investigating agency. It's one of the key agency for investigating into transactions of imports. Now, it not only enforces the Customs Act, but it is responsible for enforcement of more than 50 allied acts. And that includes Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act, Foreign Trade Policy, under the Bureau of Indian Standards, then FSSAI, Gold, then Arms Act, NDPS Act. I mean, you just name it, and there's a huge bouquet of laws that are being covered by the jurisdiction of DRI. Now, while we speak of jurisdiction, since we have also in our one of our previous sessions have seen that BIS and FSSAI is something which is a rapidly evolving law, and been upwards of 50 quality control orders that have come into place, and all these order requires mandatory orders, so to say. These orders require some mandatory certification or registration under the law, and without which goods cannot be imported into the country. So with this big of a scope under the BIS itself, the DRI has become more and more active into implementing each and every law. Same is the story with the FSSAI. This has also come up with some very stringent regulations recently, and to have an effective implementation, DRI again is into picture. Then then we come to key functions. Uh, Main task of DRI is again to investigate and to gather the intelligence and share it with the field formations, so that a relevant transaction can be identified by the field formations, and then that can be brought to the notice of DRI, which DRI then can investigate into. And once it thinks fit, it can also initiate the prosecution into the transaction. When we speak about the adjudicating power of Directorate of Revenue Intelligence, lately there has been a lot of change around this power, specifically because of the decision of Supreme Court in the issue of Canon India. So what had happened is, as we all know, DRI has been issuing the show cause notices. It has been taking the adjudication, executing the adjudicatory power, issuance of show cause notice, then deciding the matter at the first level, and then it goes on to the appellate segments. But what Canon India, the Supreme Court in Canon India said is that the law is worded in such a manner that the power to adjudicate, the power to issue a show cause notice is given to the proper officer. And I quote, the is the word that the Supreme Court has emphasized, because then it means that the proper officer who has in the first place assessed a particular import is the only officer who has the power to issue a show cause notice and adjudicate the matter. Supreme Court said that because the term the is used, it becomes very peculiar. Had the legislation intended that any other officer had the same power, then the legislation would not have used the term the, but it would have said it a proper officer. So that is the criticality of interpretation that came to be employed to find out that DRI indeed did not have the power to adjudicate the issue. Now, this of course became a huge chaos, because there were lakhs and crores of rupee locked into litigations initiated by DRI. There was huge amount of intelligence that was locked into these decisions that also had percolations to some other transactions as well, and all of that suddenly seems to have been evaporated. So what happened is, immediately after the decision came few circulars. In the circulars, the department said that this decision is we are going into special leave petitions to have a review of this decision, and that until such point that a final decision is arrived at, all the matters that pertain to an issue around DRI's jurisdiction should be kept into call book, should be kept into hold. So this was the situation, because of which DRI's very jurisdiction itself was challenged. Now, what is the repercussion? Repercussion is that all the show cause notices issued by DRI were, in a way null and void. And also, there was a possibility that, department could reinitiate the investigation, reinitiate the adjudication process. But then by the time the department could do it, the limitation would have triggered, and a lot of transactions would have already, stood expired beyond limitation, and department could not have gone beyond the assessing. Now, please bear in this mind that these are the issues. Many of them could be frivolous, but many of them could also have merit on the department side. So they would always want to make sure that the government's revenue is secured, and it was indeed in their best interest to make sure that just for a procedural lapse of who had to issue a show cause notice, a lot of substantial revenue was at stake. Now, to address this thing, what government did is it proposed an amendment into Finance Bill 2022, which of course became an act. they said they made certain amendments to make sure that the officers of DRI are treated at par with the assessing officer so far as adjudication or the issuance of show cause notice was concerned. The bill came into become an act. There was also another provision under the act which said that these powers will be these amendments will have a retrospective effect, and all the actions that the DRI officers may have undertaken prior to this amendment also would be deemed to have been taken correctly. So they gave a retrospective effect. They brought in an amendment and gave a retrospective effect to nullify this. And this is the the gamut around a DRI's power of adjudication. As we speak, yes, DRI retains its power because of this amendment, but there came a point in between where, because of the decision of Supreme Court in Canon India, there was a big question mark around DRI's jurisdiction. So this was a little bit about DRI's jurisdiction. Uh, Coming back to rest of the other activities of DRI, it also liaises with CBI, Central Bureau of Investigation, and through it as with Interpol also, because these two agencies are involved in DRI's investigation, because these are cross-border transactions that DRI primarily engages into, and then it becomes important to have intelligence across the globe wherever the other leg of the transaction is engaged into. So to that extent, DRI gets into the investigative mode and unearths the relevant facts. It also refers cases registered under the Customs Act to the Income Tax Department for them to take the action under the income tax. There is a lot of information exchange happening between the departments, and we will take a look at in a few other slides in this presentation. Then DRI is also responsible to study and suggest remedies for loopholes in the law. And it also is responsible to ensure that certain statistics, certain information is kept readily available for the Ministry of Finance and other ministries for their working. So these are also some of the other functions of DRI. Now with this, we move on to our next investigating agency, which is SIIB. Now, the difference between SIIB and DRI, as we have seen, that while DRI engages into investigating import transactions, SIIB is engaged into investigating the export transactions. Now, what is the necessity of SIIB? While you already had a DRI in place as an investigating agency. Now, we all know that export is very important for growth of the country's economy, for every country's economy. And it is always incentivized. It is also ensured that taxes are not exported along with these export transactions. But at the same time, it is important that the exports are genuine exports. These are not frivolous or fraudulent exports. Now, to maintain the balance between incentivization and making sure there are no fraudulent activities that are happening underneath it is a tightrope walk, to be honest, and it requires a specialized agency. That is the reason why SIIB came into picture. That is why SIIB was formed in the first place. Now, jurisdiction of SIIB spans over gathering of information, intelligence, taking action on information received across agencies, examination of export goods, then market inquiry, survey to curb overvaluation of exports. Many people claim MEIS now is being replaced by road tape. Then many people claim drawback, all of which are essentially linked with the value at which these goods are exported, and therefore understanding the actual value in case certain parameters like transaction value is not met, there's a related party transaction or some additional consideration is flowing. So that is when valuation rules are kicked in, and one of the important aspect of that is the market value. So that's why SIIB again gets into market value inquiry as well. Then when it comes to while getting into investigation, if it is necessary, it also has the power to hold the export benefits like drawback and MEIS, etc. Now, certain other functions of SIIB, so to say ancillary functions of SIIB, are to act as a coordinating agency and work in tandem with other investigating agencies like DRI, DGCEI, ED, etc. And whenever intelligence and information are received by SIIB, they have to either act upon them themselves or provide assistance to such other agencies for their interception and examination into the investigation. So this is a brief about SIIB. Like you said, DRI and SIIB are the two most important agencies, and we just try to clearly demarcate the difference between the jurisdiction of both these agencies. So a DRA typically gets into investigating transactions that involve claim of free trade agreement, duty benefits on the import side, then foreign trade policy benefits taken by the importers, advance authorization benefit for a certain amount. There was a pre-import condition in the pre-import condition into play, and DRI has actually gone behind all the importers to unearth the whole pre-import condition compliance. Then EPCG, imports by EOU, all of these come under the purview of DRI. Classification and consequent duty differentials, then addition of royalty and other costs to the transaction value, duty exemption to temporary imports. So all of these transactions on the import side have been, on the radar of DRI on a regular basis. Then on the SIIB side, we can expect, illegal exports of prohibited or restricted goods attracting the attention, raising the eyebrows of SIIB. Then foreign trade policy benefits on the export side, such as MEIS, SEIS, export obligation fulfillment for schemes like advance authorization and EPCG. Then claim of duty drawback or IGST refund. All these transactions on the export side attract attention of SIIB whenever there is a suspicion around the genuinity of these transactions. So these are the two key agencies and their main functions, main jurisdictions. Speaking of certain other agencies, we will take a look at DGGI. Now, DGGI was established as a, initially DGCEI to investigate the excise issues, which then later, transferred into DGGI when GST was implemented. It develops intelligence in new areas of tax evasion through its network across the country. The network functions based on the information exchange with various agencies. Agencies could be Income Tax Department, Financial Intelligence Unit, then CEIB, then SFIO, NatGrid, multiple other agencies that are linked with DGGI, who constantly share information with each other. The key functions is collection and collation and dissemination of intelligence relating to evasion of central excise duty, service tax, and GST on an all India basis. It is primarily engaged in multi-commissionerate investigation, a transaction that perhaps spans across different commissionerates, and complicated cases selected by the directorate or entrusted by it to the ministry. Now, the most important question is why DGGI is relevant for customs investigation. Now, there is an overlap of certain transactions that fall into the jurisdiction of customs law as well as GST. So for example, import of goods on which we pay IGST. This IGST is paid through the Customs Tariff Act, but the availability of credit thereon is administered by your Central Goods and Services Tax Act, CGST Act. So likewise, refund is, GST refund can be claimed when, exports are made without on payment of duty. So that's a transaction which is preliminary covered by a Customs Act, which is export, and the refund of GST, which is primarily overseen by the GST law. So whenever such overlapping of customs and GST comes into play, DGGI has an active role to play. So that's when it becomes important that DGGI is again involved into the whole concept. Now, with this, we come to the two of other agencies. One is CEIB. Now, understanding about CEIB is very important. It may not have a direct interface with the taxpayers, but it is an agency that plays the important role, or it provides a platform for information exchange between different agencies. So this different agencies, and this is the reason why a transaction that is otherwise covered under the Income Tax Act may also have its repercussions with say customs law, something like say transfer pricing and special valuation branch under the Customs Act exchanges such information, and then one transaction that leads into one particular investigation also has the possibility to lead into investigation under other law also. So that the reason behind this is the seamless exchange of information that is being facilitated by CEIB. It was set up in 1985, and it functions as a nodal agency for economic intelligence and seamless coordination amongst other agencies in the area of economic offenses. It may not have direct interface with the taxpayer, like we said, but it makes sure that the information is exchanged between different agencies. It operates inter alia on issues relating to tax evasion, foreign exchange violation, supply of counterfeit currency, hawala transactions, financial frauds in stock market, money laundering, drug trafficking, smuggling, etc., and a lot more things. So it does have a nexus with other branches, investigating agencies also. But for us, what is important is that it is active in the space of tax evasion. It is active in the space of financial frauds or financial crimes. So that is why CEIB is also important. Now, the most important agency across the investigating agencies is Enforcement Directorate. It is more like an umbrella investigating agency. In a way, wherever there is a violation of a laws of PMLA, FERA, FEMA, then ED comes into picture and it investigates the transaction. It was incorporated way back in 1956, and it's a multidisciplinary organization mandated with investigation of economic crimes and violation of foreign exchange laws. So again, because its jurisdiction comprises of economic laws, it is economic crimes, it becomes relevant for any tax transaction that for any tax transaction to come into the purview of ED yet again. So that is why ED also is important. Typically, transactions like non-realization of export proceed tend to raise, suspicion of PMLA, money laundering activities, and hawala. So these are when ED becomes very active again immediately, even though the transaction is pretty much covered under the customs law. So this was our fifth and perhaps the last agency that we would be speaking of in this whole explanation about agencies, which agencies are active, and what functions do they really have. So I have a quick poll around here. Perhaps it is something that we could just simply say that how well we have understood about the DGGI, and I would request our team to pop up the poll question around DGGI, please. All right, I think we may have pulled it out. Can you have a quick result, please?
Sure. So we have 44% saying it's the DDGI and 38% saying it's SIIB and 19% saying it's either of them.
Okay, so I think we have 19% people answering us correctly, because it's a transaction that falls into the jurisdiction of both the statutes. So SIIB and DGGI both will have the jurisdiction to investigate that transaction. Of course, the show cause notice will be issued only once. It will be adjudicated only once, but investigation can be taken up by both the agencies. There is no restriction around that piece. Great. Sorry. So with this, we move on to certain more important aspects of investigation. That's investigation method. It's important to know that typically how these investigations will be conducted. Primarily, these days, investigations are being spearheaded due to human intelligence as well as data analysis. Now, when I refer to human intelligence, we have also mentioned here that the information is flowing from the field officers. Field officers that are posted on the docks or the ports, where informations are being shared. They are the ones who understand the documentation firsthand. They are the ones who understand the products that is coming into the country or being exported the first hand, and they are the ones to raise the suspicion first. So this is one source of information. The other is data analysis. When data analysis comes into picture, whenever there's a change in pattern of, say, declared assessable value, or the HSN, or the rate of tax, or description of goods, all of that is noted quickly, and through the system it can be very easily identified, and any such change is questioned for its authenticity. Now the flip side of this thing is, if a change has taken place without any change of law, or all other things being equal, then either the change is towards the correction of the change could be a corrective action which brings all the past transactions under suspicion, and if the change by itself is not a corrective action but perhaps a wrongdoing itself, then all the future transactions will come into aspect. So either the past or the future comes into question whenever there is a change. So that's as logical as it gets. So therefore, we have to be very cautious about the changes that we bring into our HSN codes, the tax rates that we apply, or the assessable value that we have, a description of goods, and all of such things. Then another source is information exchange. We just saw that there are dedicated agencies to make sure that exchange is seamlessly, the data is seamlessly exchanged between different agencies like DRI, CBDT, SIIB, EDI, CBI, and other customs formations. So that is also a very source of initiating the investigation. Again, what are the powers of investigating agencies? This is again an important aspect. We as an assessee need to know, once we are getting investigated, then what all powers the agency has, and where we really need to start perhaps allowing them to investigate us and start holding our rights back to make sure that they do not exceed their powers. The first is examination of goods. They have the powers of search, seizure, and arrest as well. They can do the market survey. We have a little detailed information coming our way around search, seizure, and arrest in few other slides. Then they can set up alert through their in the digital portals or the manual interventions to identify a particular trend or a particular type of transaction, a pattern of transaction, and to take cognizance thereof. Then they have the power to cancel our import-export codes or the customs broker license. They have the power to issue circulars to make sure certain issue that has gone into difficulty or gray area is clarified enough. They have the power to launch criminal complaints, and they also have the powers to withhold your benefits like MEIS and road tax. Some of these we have already seen in the erstwhile slides, and this perhaps was an attempt to collate all of these powers together at one single place. Now, with this, we come to the investigation framework. Typically, now, as far as the law is concerned, we all know that they have the powers to do so many things, but on ground, how really things tend to proceed is also something that could be relevant for many of us who have faced the investigation before this, or are likely to face the investigation henceforth. Now, it typically initiates with issuance of summons. Summons is something that is a power given to the authorities under section 108 of the act. We will take a look at in detail about it in certain other slides. We have seen that summonses are being issued to senior leaderships also to take the statements, as senior as managing directors or CEO or chairmen as well of the board. And it becomes difficult for multinational organizations or very high very important individuals who are sitting at the top of the entire affair to face those summons for a trivial information. So how to tackle that is also something that we have covered in some of the other slides. Then there are powers of search and seizure. They have the powers to enter the premise. They have the powers to search a conveyance or even an individual to gather the facts or the relevant documents or the information or even the goods for that matter. There is a possibility, and it may not always come through that way, but there is a possibility that there are certain coercive and prejudicial actions taken by the officers. They also go through a lot of pressure around revenue collection, and that could perhaps be the reason, and many other that we may not know, we may not understand on the other side of the table, but there is the possibility of that happening. Another aspect is possible reporting to media on the investigation. Now, it's a key concern for those which are listed entities, which are public organizations, because public perception about the company makes a deep impact into their affairs. So, media reporting has an important aspect to play around this, and then it eventually culminates into issuance of show cause notice. So in a way, investigation ends when the adjudication has begun. So issuance of show cause notice is next phase of the entire process, which is adjudication. And that's where the investigation, the role of an investigator comes to an end in the capacity of an investigation. So this is the basic framework around how investigation proceeds. Now, like I said, we have certain information to share about summons, about search and seizure in some of the upcoming slides, and we perhaps could focus better on them. So summons, as I said, is a power under section 108. It is essentially a power to call upon a person either to give evidence or produce document. Then the prerequisite, there are certain guidelines that ask the officers to make sure that, per se status of the person who is summoned is not important, is not consequential, but it is important to make sure that sufficient care has been taken to summon only such person who would have the first-hand knowledge. So if you're really speaking about a certain characteristic of a product to investigate into classification aspect, it wouldn't be reasonable to issue a summons to the managing director or a senior person sitting on the board. And incidences like these should be avoided and can be avoided. Then who has the power to issue summons? The law says all gazetted officers are empowered to issue summons, and a person so summoned is bound to attend either in person or through an authorized agent. Now, the only exception for this requirement, that the mandate of responding to a summons, is perhaps exemption from appearance is given to the woman who by customs ought not to be compelled to appear in public. So that is the only exception. Without that, in any other case, any person who has been summoned has to appear by himself or through a representative appointed. Now, the purpose of summons is to gather the relevant facts and information. Summons cannot be issued to ascertain the statutory interpretation, the legal interpretation that has been adopted by the assessee. They can ask what your interpretation has been, but they cannot expect that person being investigated under section 108 to spell out the interpretation. If that person is unaware about the statutory interpretation, we can very well say that he is unaware and he would perhaps require an expertise to address that question. So very clearly, investigating the facts is the only is the purpose of section 108, and it cannot overlap onto statutory interpretation piece. Then next part is these proceedings under 108 are deemed to be judicial proceedings, which means that if one tends to provide a false evidence or intentionally insults or interrupts, may result into punishment under Indian Penal Code. Now these punishments are typically imprisonment. So this is the result, or rather the importance of it being called as a judicial proceeding. And again, failure to respond to summons is also something that is met typically with proceedings under IPC that result into imprisonment. So this is a little bit about summons and statements. We can then move on to another aspect, that is search and seizure. Now, there are typically three types of searches. One is search of a person, then search of a premise, and then search of a conveyance. Search of a person can be done under section 100 when a person is entering or leaving out of India, and another section while he is anywhere in the India, provided there is a suspicion that he is hiding certain information or the goods that is necessary for the proceedings. Another important aspect of search of a person is that when there is a woman to be searched, then the presence of a woman officer is must. Without a woman officer, a woman cannot be searched for. There has to be two or more witnesses, and the person being searched also has the right to be brought before a magistrate if he wishes so. Then search of premises is meant to identify goods liable to confiscation or documents or things that are relevant for prosecution under the Customs Act. The search of premises can be executed only if the requisite goods and documents is not produced despite requisitioning. So a search of premise cannot immediately begin. It needs necessarily to be preceded with a notice of certain requisitioning. Then there is also stop and search of conveyance. The power to stop and to search the conveyance. It is pretty much for the same reason that we could go for search of premises to basically identify the goods or the material or the information that is relevant for a investigation. And a conveyance typically involves motor vehicle, aircraft, vessel, or even an animal, something like bullock cart or a horse cart is also covered under the definition of conveyance. The space or the premise where a conveyance can be investigated extends to Indian customs water, which is typically 24 nautical miles from the land mass, and that is the premise that can be searched under search of conveyances. So this was a little bit about summons, search, and seizure, and we thought it fit to in a way collate a key checklist for us all to go through. And I'll request Rajatji to take up this piece and guide us through.
Thank you so much, Ketan. Thanks. Could we have the slide deck, please? Thanks. So, as discussed, in great detail today, so there are, on the basis of, our experience, there are certain key pointers that we have put together. Of course, they have been discussed time and again in today's discussion. The idea is to, just do a rebrush of that. So first is, cooperating with the investigating agency. So this essentially is taxpayers' duty that, they suitably cooperate with the investigating authorities. Whatever information, etc., is demanded, should be produced to them. Or if there is some information which may take certain time to collate, we may suitably request them that, it may take us 2 or 3 days in order to collate the same, and that shall be suitably, provided to them. One. Second, at the same time is, pertaining to statements, etc., which of course we will discuss. So there is also likely to be an element of caution, and that also, needs to be, tackled in a very, tactful manner. So therefore, while on one hand we have to cooperate, the element of, there could be an element of threat from them. So that has to be, suitably negated. So in that context, therefore, it is critical that whosoever person is sitting before the investigating authorities or whom we are allowing to face the authorities, he should be a person who can, sustain some kind of pressure. So while cooperation is important, it is equally important that, we have the right kind of people sitting in front of the investigation agencies so far as the organization is concerned. One. Second, information transparency. One is, of course, you have to take care of the positions taken by the company, the information, so on and so forth. But at the same time, you may also have your personal skin involved in the game, in the sense that, if some false information, some, false details are shared, you may be personally, penalized, or there may be a, scenario of prosecution as well. So in the interest of the organization and also in the interest of the individual at hand, it is critical that, that transparency of the information should be maintained vis-a-vis the authorities. Thereafter, resisting coercive measures. So yes, as I did say, as part, answer to part one itself, that so far as the coercive resistance is concerned, there will be an attempt, to abuse people, who are there facing the investigation. There may be a scenario, or you may have witnessed that at times they may get, physical as well. So these kind of things, could happen. But the bottom line is that one has to try and maintain one's exposure. But at the same time, in this pressure, one should not give away or write anything, which he is not supposed to. Yeah. So if, something is not true and, you are made to write that and give a statement under section 108, and you are writing something that you do not believe in, or if a technical question is involved where Ketan did say that you could, categorically say that so far as this issue is concerned, I am not the right person, and therefore I do need some technical expertise on table. So that kind of questions, you have to be very categorical. And when you are writing the statement, many a times these guys are spelling it to you that you kindly write this or that. So in those cases, wherever what you are about to write, you believe that, is not factually correct, or you don't believe it to be factually correct, you may take a pause, try to explain to them that, this may not be the right position, or I may want to, articulate this in this particular manner and not the one that you are articulating. So these are, some of the tips which may prove to be, worthwhile. Thereafter, retraction of any statement, in the heat of the moment, in the pressure, it may so happen that the individual under scanner, gets succumbed to the pressure exerted by the authorities. So in those cases, there are judgments even by the apex court that you can suitably retract your statement. But there are a couple of things which are critical to understand. One is retraction must be done within a reasonable period of time. You can't retract your statement, 6 months down the line. Oh, I had made this statement before the authorities, and now I will retract it after a period of say 6 months. So that may not be permissible. Second is retraction post issuance of a show cause notice. So let us take an example that a statement was taken from one of your employees, say 2 months back, and 1 month back the show cause notice has also been issued. Relying upon those statements made by the employee, then it may be very difficult to legally sustain that you are retracting a statement post issuance of a notice on which your statement has been relied upon. So that again, there also the element of reasonability is very, very critical when it comes to retracting the statements. And of course, this has to be done in writing. So far as formal communication is concerned, so whatever the proceedings are happening, so every action should be sought to be brought on record, should be your endeavor. If any computer, laptop, documents are being taken away, it must be your endeavor as assessee and request the investigating authorities that whatever is being taken away, in the Panchnama, a suitable, mention of those documents, those goods, those computer files, so on and so forth, may suitably be done. Thereafter, in order to, have a strong position before these authorities, while there may be certain interpretational issues that assessee may have taken a wrong, interpretation in the eyes of the officers, so far as assessee is concerned, he believes this, interpretation is right. So therefore, in order to avoid these cases, or at least to, present a strong position vis-a-vis these authorities, it is so very advisable that there should be a periodic review of all the tax position, or at least a reaffirmation thereof. So many a times we may have internal experts, but on other times you may need help from the external experts as well in matters of classification or valuation, which are pretty complex in nature. Last but not the least, again, expert guidance, as I did say in the last point, whenever any, point is brought by investigating agencies, we may or may not agree with that legal proposition. So it is advisable, consulting the experts before even accepting or conceding that position, or whether you want to dispute at a relevant point in time. Many a times, they may exert the pressure and say that at this point in time, at least on this issue, you have to pay a duty of 2 or 3 crore rupees. In such cases, while we may pay, we may request them that we want to pay this under protest and we are not conceding this liability, so that tomorrow when we do get into litigation, so this particular, measure or aspect helps us at a later point in time. So every, investigation or every audit that happens, brings its own experience. So these are some of the, most critical points which we thought should be, communicated to our viewers. Yeah. So with this, we have the last bit on the key takeaways. I will request Poonam to, spell out those, which is nothing but, a sum up of the holistic thing that we have discussed today. Over to you, Poonam. Thanks.
Thanks, Rajat. Thank you, Ketan. I think everything that I'm going to sum up is at some point in time touched upon either by Ketan or Rajat. But just to quickly highlight a few aspects that in our view must be kept in mind whenever you are faced with an investigation process. Like we began the session on the note that identifying whether you are under an audit process or an investigation process is the key points to start from. The way the whole tone is set, the beginning of the whole process happens actually may have a large ramification on how the whole process will get concluded. So being informed, aware what is it that you are undergoing and what are your rights, obligations, what kind of questioning, what kind of asks you may be posed with the relevant authorities is one of the key aspects. Being clear on that is the importance of that cannot be in any way diminished. It's also important, like Rajat and Ketan have been talking about extensively, that knowing with clarity who are the right people to respond to which kind of inquiries is critical for an organization. People who are front-ending the process, possessing the right kind of information at right time is also critical to the quality of investigations from audit procedures that you go under. It is really, really critical that specifically in investigations, there may be times that you undergo some kind of a pressure, given the kind of inquiry that goes on, the kind of timings at which you are exposed to the inquiry, the kind of information that is being asked for, and maintaining a strong temperament, having a poised disposition really helps. Having understanding of the implications of various related statutes and knowing the investigative powers of different agencies is a critical part of effectively handling the investigation process. At the same time, knowing your own rights and obligations is also one of the critical pieces. And to overall sum it up, it's basically a balanced approach. By all means, you got to fully cooperate during an investigation process, and at the same time being very clear about what kind of information can be expected to have, and do providing that proactively. And at the same time, if there is some pieces of information that you cannot be expected to have, or you may not have expertise on, dealing with that effectively goes a long way in handling an investigation process effectively. With that, we come to conclusion of this third session. I see Rajat is raising his hand. Rajat, you can go ahead and say what you
Thank you so much, Poonam. So, one critical aspect is that, during such investigations, there may come a point that, you feel as an organization and individuals that excessive pressure is being exerted, or there are threats of arrest, etc., etc. And there's an extreme amount of unreasonableness, which is being shown by the officers. In such cases, you may also measure, whether you need to, knock the doors of the writ court in order to, for them to intervene and, provide suitable relief. Because you may, come up with the idea that whatever information is needed, who are positions, who are documentation, we are ready to give. But there appears to be, a prejudiced mind, and excessive abuse of power is being exercised. So depending upon the facts and circumstances, you may also, figure out and measure whether that could be an immediate action to be taken, say on the next day or next to next day. Sometimes these investigations continue even for a period of 60 hours, at the trot. So these are, some of the instances when you may think that whether it's a, it's a perfect situation to knock the doors of the writ court and ask for immediate intervention. Just wanted to make that.
Sure. So just letting the audience know that Rajat is coming straight from the oven, and maybe having dealt with the heat from the investigating authorities, but not to scandalize everything. Just to put the things in perspective. Yeah, it is a rigorous process, and at the same time, you can expect all kind of reasonableness if you know what you are expected of and what you are not expected of. Dealing with it with balance can really go a long way. Yeah, so with this, we complete the third session, and we look forward all of you being there in the next session as well. We are going to complete our 4-session series in the next session. Since we have already overshot time, Rajat, do we take a couple of questions or should we close?
I think we may take one of the questions, if not two.
Okay, sure. So one of the questions is regarding providing confidential information. If there is a piece of information that is critical to an investigation and is being asked for, but falls within the domain of confidential information for an investigatee, is how do we deal with that situation?
Ketan, you wish to take up? Please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So when it comes to confidential information, the powers of investigating authorities are such that they have the right to demand even the most confidential information. Because if you see the revenue, which is the revenue that we owe to the government, has a paramount importance over any other obligation that we may have. And these are the situations when you are, eventually you are forced to provide that information. You would not have an option, but you can at the same time keep it in writing. You can mention that, this is a confidential information and this be investigated or this be analyzed in the most confidential aspect. This is the only way you have. You can also, if anything, despite that, the confidentiality is breached, then of course you would have other remedies under the law that, claiming the damages and, any other aspect under the civil law. But so far as your obligation to provide a confidential information is concerned, you are not relieved out of that obligation just because the information is confidential. So in a way, you are forced to provide that information.
Thank you very much, Ketan. I think that with that, we come to the conclusion of today's session. I once again thank each one of you for continuing to participate, and I look forward to see you in the next session, and which is going to be our final session of the series. Thanks to you, Rajat and Ketan as well.
Thank you.
Thank you,
thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Poonam, and thank you to our lovely audience. Thank you so much.